Great. We are live. Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 1 of the Iron Lotus podcast. I have a good friend with me. His name is Nick Petikas, and he is a psychologist. I'll have him introduce himself too. Nick, you're going to have to I want you to go ahead and explain to everybody who you are and what it is that you do. To me, you're a friend and a very accomplished, successful guy, and you've always been a very positive guy. We worked together a while ago at a big box gym. That's how I know Nick. He was a trainer, like myself, and he said to me one day while we were in a meeting, "These are my goals. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pursue this." This is way before I believe you even had any background in psychology, or maybe even not even the prerequisites for that. I'm not really sure, and you'll have to talk about that.
Sure.
And you went ahead. And I know personally, we could talk about it or not, but you've definitely had interesting family life and some personal struggles with that, and people close to you. So we can get into all that, but you knew what you wanted to do, and I thought that was awesome. And it's always great for me to watch people succeed and say, "Hey, this is what I want to do." It's not like you're a child and saying, "I want to be a fireman." And at that stage of your life, and after having gone through school or just having a regular job and saying, these are the things I want to accomplish. I also think that psychology is so important when it comes to training, succeeding in any goals in life, relationships, everything you could possibly think of. It's always good to check up on that. And so I would love to get into a conversation with Nick about what he thinks about the human brain. So Nick, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, it sounds like we have the makings of a great conversation coming up. So my name is everything that Matt said is pretty much accurate as far as our history. We met together at a big box gym, which I like the way you put that. Fundamentally, yes, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also an officer in the United States Navy. So that's perhaps one nuance to what I do different than most clinical psychologists. I'm active duty U.S. military as well as being a psychologist. Fundamentally, I'm just kind of following my heart, so to speak, and pursuing my goals as I go along the path.
Awesome. Very cool. So let's get right into it. And why did you decide this path? And specifically, why did you decide to do it in the military? Why not help everybody?
Sure. Well, it's a complex question, right? So the path kind of chose me too. Briefly, I think I was first introduced to psychology when I was a teenager, when I was about 16 years old. Actually, through music, I was introduced to the concepts of Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud and one of the kind of pioneers in what is modern day clinical psychology and psychotherapy. Some of the concepts that Jung proposed were pretty fantastic. Things like the collective unconscious, which kind of suggests that all human beings on a very deep level share an unconscious. And I think another way of thinking of that would be instincts. Why do we have instincts? These are part of the collective unconscious, And I kind of like the idea that we're all connected, that we're not as separate as it seems. So collective unconscious, the shadow, just these really kind of fantastic concepts to a 16-year-old kid who was like, wow, that kind of blew my mind, right? I don't even think I had a conception of psychology or psychotherapy before that, right? Or self-reflection for that matter. So started around there, my interest in it. Years go by, I maintained an interest, a layman's interest for the most part. Never really considered going into the field, I think mainly because I was intimidated by pursuing the degrees that would be necessary to do that. So I never even thought I would kind of do as much education as I have. But I think what really kind of was a catalyst to put me into the field was, we talked a little bit earlier in the introduction about life events. So my mother struggled with cancer for most of my life. She was first diagnosed when I was about 8 years old, and she was a great model of strength and resilience because she fought cancer off for nearly 13 years. When she finally passed away at a young age of only 51, just brought into stark reality the nature of our lives, mortality, and I decided that if I only get 50 years on the planet, right, or 70 years on the planet, or 100 years on the planet, I don't want to waste my time. I want it to be meaningful. I want every day, if I'm working every day, I don't want to be part of the rat race. I want meaning. I want something that I love doing, right? And the one thing that came up, in this kind of epiphany moment, if you call it that, is, well, why not clinical psychology, right? And this is this is in my mid to late mid 20s, 26, 27, and I looked at the mountain. Yeah, that would be a good way. A good analogy is that I kind of woke up from childhood and I looked at the mountain, meaning clinical psychology, and I began to climb. And I think the conversation that you referenced earlier was me kind of saying, like, I'm going to climb this mountain. And it did entail me doing a lot. I had no formal background. I had a degree in literature, which I really enjoyed, but it's kind of like, okay, you read a lot of books. I wasn't a professor. So I had to go to school for 2 years just to get the prerequisites in psychology. Then I had to apply to a graduate program. And there's so many spider webs where we could talk about all these different things, but graduate programs are incredibly competitive to get into. And I've always been kind of an all or nothing person. So I applied to one program and I said, if it's meant to be, I'm going to get into this program. I'm going to be a psychologist. And I did get into the program. And from there, the journey has just exploded. And I think that's something to be said is that, and you can stop me whenever I want because I know I'm really kind of just expanding on this conversation. But the point is that if you set a lofty goal, if you try to climb a mountain, your options and your experiences are going to expand in ways that you maybe never even imagined, right? So I always kind of thought, like, yeah, I'll be like a clinical psychologist. Before I knew anything about it, right? Maybe I'll have a private practice. Like you imagine, like, somebody having a practice in an office and working with people. At one point, I thought maybe I would work, in a school, be like a school psychologist, maybe nip it in the bud and kind of get to kids before they really developed any more chronic neurosis or pathology. But then something in me just kind of drew me in different directions. I was kind of drawn to, and I still am drawn to, more intense, vibrant experiences. So I was drawn away from working in a school to working at Rikers Island, which is obviously a prison or jail in New York, which was huge as far as my development as a psychologist and a human being. And then again, you don't even realize what paths will open up until you get on the path, until you start climbing the mountain. You find all the views that you don't know about when you're at the base of the mountain. I'm using these analogies, right? But I found out, I never even knew that you could be a clinical psychologist and be in the military until I went to a conference, a psychology conference, and there was a booth there for Navy psychology. And I can kind of pause there to give you some chance to respond to them, because then that just, again, opened up all these other interests indoors in me. And then my path with Navy clinical psychology is, probably a whole 2-hour discussion in and of itself. So I'll take a breath and I'll let you kind of, respond if you want.
Yeah, sure. You opened up some thought for me. You know what? There's a little bit of an echo. Do you have headphones by any chance or no?
I probably do. You want to let me pause this? I have something to plug in, or would it be Bluetooth better?
It's up to you. But as I'm speaking, I can hear the speaker. Actually, I don't hear it now. You could mute your end as well too. That's fine.
I heard the echo early on too, but I don't hear it now.
Okay, perfect. I don't hear it now. Great. Maybe it'll just happen when we flip-flop. But so drawing back to, if you don't mind, we say like maybe when you lost your mom and you say that this was obviously something she fought for a long time, cancer. Do you feel that your drive and your emotional connection to really wanting to succeed because you felt that shortness of life contributed to your ability? And do you think that when you were dealing with patients, do you think an emotional connection for success in some way, shape, or form helps people succeed at climbing the mountain, if you will? That's the metaphor that you used.
So let me see if I understand your question. Do I think losing my mom has affected me in a way that affects my work? Is that kind of the question you're asking?
Or just your drive to realize, like, okay, there's a lot of things that I need to do in order to get where I want to go. And it kind of kicked you in the butt. And then can you draw a parallel in your experience as a psychologist now in people's success in changing their behaviors or changing their life in some positive way by having an emotional connection to something that really, let's say, affected them in a strong way or drives them, and that it's an emotional connection, not an intellectual, like everyone knows they should work out, but maybe you still have people that are unhealthy and they eat whatever they want and they don't exercise, because we know intellectually, okay, it makes sense, it's healthy, but what is it that drives you, like an emotional connection, maybe something stronger that you can really connect with? Can you draw parallels? Can you say that it helped you, and can you say that it helps patients? Maybe do you see that?
Okay. I think what you're asking me, I just want to clarify, is that are my experiences, the things that I have been through, do they help me to be more effective as a therapist? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes.
And I would say absolutely, right? Because we filter the message right through ourselves, our character, right? So yeah, you could say things to people. You could take a brilliant, experienced psychotherapist and have them write things down as far as therapeutic interventions. But I think what gives those words any power, right, is that they have to be genuinely filtered through the character, personality, spirit, whatever you want to call it, of an individual. Right? There has to be some charisma there. There has to be some passion that gives words, right? Which, if you think about, if you really want to get into words and letters, are just symbols, right? But we give them meaning. So I think that, yes, an individual's experiences kind of flavor the message. So I think, and a lot of the psychologists and psychotherapists that I really admire fundamentally go back to the concept that it's the relationship that heals, right? So it's the connection that you have with people that is the deciding factor on getting better. So it's developing rapport with people. It's connecting with them, right? And through that connection, maybe you develop trust, maybe your ears and your mind open up in a different way, and you're better able to hear the message, absorb it, remember it, and want to put it into play, put it into action.
So for whatever might be affecting a human, you're saying that hive mind comes into play where you're connecting with other humans regardless. And in that connection, you're starting to understand yourself even more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Now to go back to your answer about why you followed this path, and we ended where you saw a booth for being a military psychologist. Now, entering the military comes with a whole host of other things, but you had to make now that decision to say, okay, well, I want to go to basic training. I'm going to deal with that. Even after schooling, I'm going to do basic, and then I might have to go God knows where if we go to war, right? They might call you up first. They're certainly going to call you before they're going to call me, right? Mm-hmm. So now you have to have a whole other mindset. So why do you then take that mindset and go forward and take it to the military?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of reasons for that too. So in Jungian psychology, right, it's a lot of metaphor again, right? And they talk about fundamentally the path to self-activation, right? The path to becoming your highest self is on the hero's journey, okay? And that's like a myth that you can look at all of our popular culture. You can kind of look at the path of, great people's lives. You can look at your own life. And the hero's journey is something that needs to occur in order for you to grow, right? The hero's journey essentially consists of leaving your home, okay, in a very literal sense. But it also consists of leaving that comfort zone, leaving the old concept of your own sense of self, right? It requires you to leave that, to go out into the wilderness, right? To go out on a journey. Then it requires you to face a challenge, right? To struggle, to suffer, right? To identify like the dragon that you have to go kind of face. And it requires you to dig deep and build your strength, right? And to find your courage in order to overcome that dragon. I actually recently heard a great metaphor or a kind of an analogy about physical fitness, right? Is how do you get stronger? Is that you push your muscles in your body a little bit, every day, and slowly but surely you get stronger as a result physically. The psyche is the same way. You have to challenge yourself and push yourself to grow and to get stronger, right? So that's part of the second part of the hero's journey. And then in all the metaphors, you can look at any story, right? The hero, if he's successful, overcomes the dragon, and he either returns home a hero, right? Or he becomes a king, or he becomes a higher sense of himself after kind of facing that journey, right? So all that is in my head, both, pretty consciously, and I think according to Jung, that's what's in all of us very unconsciously, is that we have these challenges that we either face them or we avoid them. And he would say the people that are avoiding the challenge are the ones, that's why you're suffering, because you're not fulfilling your life, right? You're depressed or you're anxious because you're not, fulfilling your purpose. You're not facing the dragon with courage. So anyway, this is all in my head. Why do I join the Navy is because of both an unconscious and conscious concept of myself as I see myself as a warrior, right? So the Navy literally allows me to get closer to that identity, right? But it also allows me to kind of push the limits, right? To do something, my uncle said, like very bold. And I do think it was bold, the thing I did, because I pretty much left my comfort zone. And the things I have been doing in the Navy also, that was one thing I never, like I said, the view changes the higher up you go, and you're exposed to more and more things. So the Navy was one view, but even now in the Navy, I've done things that I never would have imagined. I've been to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and I've served there for 9 months. I've worked very closely with the Marine Corps. I've been embedded with the 1st Marine Regiment out here in Camp Pendleton in California, and I'm gonna be working with Navy SEALs in about 6 months. I'm gonna be working with Navy SEALs, and that job is gonna again expand in ways that I don't even realize yet. They're going to be sending me all over the world to the places where our special forces are active. Places like Africa, and who knows, what I'm going to be seeing, what I'm going to be doing. So I trailed off there. I mean, why did I do that? For all of those reasons, right? I saw it. I am a very intuitive person, and there was something that drew me to it, and there wasn't much question. I saw it, I learned about it, and it's almost like that. I was like, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. That's the path.
Awesome. Felt right. Intuition felt right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a great segue into, so what's different about your job? Because obviously you had expectations, I'm sure, right? You had this mindset. Okay, you have the warrior mindset. Now you're combining it with the ability to help people really get out of your comfort zone. What did you expect versus what you're experiencing?
So what did I expect? Just with psychology early on was, I think,
the whole thing. I mean,
yeah. So it starts off like, I'll be a clinical psychologist. I'll have a private practice somewhere. I'll live in like Manhattan. I'll wind up finding a nice girl, and I'll move to Westchester, and I'll just kind of commute, and I'll have a job like that. That was my initial thought when I was like, oh, I'll be a psychologist. Compared to what I've been doing is, first off, working with active duty Marines, combat veterans with very, very intense post-traumatic stress is something far different than walking with, not working with, the walking wounded is what they call, like, people who are struggling with, legitimate but far less intense conditions, right? People who are struggling with their marriage, people who are struggling with, a dissatisfaction with life, which has led to anxiety or depression. That's all legitimate. That's all very, very legit. But it's much different than a young man who's been deployed to combat several times, who's got very intense PTSD, which is, unraveling his life. So that was one difference. Going to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, driving past the prison, like the clinic I worked in there was amazing. You imagine on one hand, right, Manhattan, you're from New York, people watching this can imagine Manhattan. But I worked in a clinic on the pretty much about 100 yards off from a cliff. And beyond the cliff was just the most, crystal clear blue water of the Caribbean Sea that I've ever seen in front of me. To my left, the prisons where we have all these, detainees. I was there when Castro died. I mean, never would I have ever imagined that experience. Coming to be embedded with the Marine Corps now, embedded means like you're part of the regiment. So, I'm honored to wear their uniform. I go on hikes with them. I go to the range with them. If the wars that we have been fighting in the past were as active, I would be deploying with them to Iraq and Afghanistan. I have gone through a training called SERE, S-E-R-E. Right? It stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. And it's known as one of the most kind of intense trainings that you can go through in the military. And I would encourage you or any viewers, if we get anyone, to just Google SERE and you'll see. But it's essentially a training that was developed after the Korean War and really after Vietnam, when we would have POWs who needed some kind of training to learn how to do exactly what the acronym stands for, which survive if you're behind enemy lines, survive, evade capture, if you are captured, resist interrogation or torture, and fundamentally try to escape. And the training that I went through, which actually is classified, so I can't talk about it, was one of the most intense things I've ever done in my life. And it puts you to the test. It puts your strength, if you think you're strong, puts you to the test, because the training takes away your ability to fight, and it forces you to only endure.
Did you feel more pressure to do well? I don't know if you can do well at something like that. I mean, obviously it could break you and say, I want to leave. But did you feel more pressure to do well on that because you're a psychologist? So you felt like, I have to be strong mentally? Or did it just, it was so invasive and it was so in the moment that you just kind of tried to deal with it?
Did I feel more pressure because I was a psychologist? No, it was more just I felt like an obligation to myself, like this self-concept. If you think you're a warrior and you think you're strong, how often is that really tested for anybody? Mainly in our life, right? Like we have a very, very comfortable, secure lifestyle. Most Americans, right? Very, very sheltered, I think. So it's more like a test for, I'm a psychologist, but that's like one layer, like deep down, like who I am, right? I think it goes back to the warrior, and that warrior part of me is like, okay, this is like one of your first real tests in your life. So I felt an obligation to that aspect of myself, to get through SERE with honor, right? Because there were moments where, like you go down to your core of like fundamentally, like, holy shit, like this is intense.
And now, were you experiencing this with the guys that you are embedded with right now?
No. So I was sent to the training by myself. There were other individuals there going through the training, but I didn't know anybody. So I pretty much went there on my own, and other people who were required to go through SERE, they kind of bring together a class of people. And typically people who are of high risk of being captured behind enemy lines. So typically, not typically, all special forces have to go through it, and almost all pilots and aircrew have to go through it, because you can imagine being shot down behind enemy lines. Like, you may find yourself in a situation where you need to survive, evade, resist, and escape. So those are the type of people I went through it with. Yeah.
Out of curiosity for your own life, have you encountered any situations or caught yourself since that training, which obviously very intense, sounds more intense than, let's say, basic training,
Yeah.
where you caught yourself sort of overthinking a scenario that maybe the rest of us, Gen Pop, might say, oh, that's a big deal, and you recall this training and say to yourself, really?
No, I don't think the training didn't do that. What the training really helped me to find is like endurance. Like, we all are capable of enduring more than we realize. We are all, I think, the human spirit. That's why I say we all are. We all have more strength than we realize, but you have to tap into it. So I haven't, like I said, I haven't come across anything that challenged me to that point. Most of the challenges that I face, I think things that rile me up mostly are interpersonal challenges, interacting with people that are close to me, that there's friction or conflict there. So, and does that help to kind of me to minimize the effect that those challenges have? I don't know. It's different. It's different. It's a different kind of challenge, those interpersonal conflicts, compared with enduring something like that SEER training.
Which I think is great that you said that, because I think that gives listeners who are Gen Pop and haven't necessarily gone through that, you're respecting the idea that everybody goes through something different. Everyone has a story. And with that sort of segue into my question, we obviously, like I said, we met in a big box gym. You were a trainer. Do you draw any comparisons between the success of some of your patients or people's ability in general to overcome with fitness and training and a discipline in that sense?
Any comparisons between psychology or psychotherapy, or?
Yeah, like, do their minds get better because maybe they help their bodies get better? Does it set them in an activation mode in a positive way if they get moving?
Sure. I think, a lot of ways. So I think human psychology is present in every aspect of human behavior. If you think about it, like, psychology is who you are. So you bring that everywhere. Okay. Directly with training, I think that fundamentally people can develop confidence, right? They can set a fitness goal. I want to lose 10 pounds. And maybe that cascades into like, wow, I set this goal to lose 10 pounds and I did it. Maybe I can set other goals in my life, not related to fitness, right? You learn something about yourself. I think that your, self-esteem can improve. And if you believe in yourself physically, a physical kind of achievement is maybe like some of the early ways that we build esteem. The young child learns that, okay, I'm no longer confined to crawling on the floor. I can walk. And look at what opens up to you when you really realize that your body can move, right? I think certainly fitness for me, and this kind of is going to trail off, but like, I certainly have a huge amount of confidence in myself because of physical feats. I was a wrestler for most of my childhood and my adolescence, and I learned a lot of psychological lessons from the challenges of the physical act of wrestling. So I think absolutely it can be an entry point for people to grow psychologically through physical fitness.
Now, I know you're not a psychopharmacologist, but do you prescribe medication? No.
I do not.
Okay. Do you prescribe fitness or exercise to your clients who might be experiencing post-traumatic stress or just anxiety?
Yeah, I think so. I'm fundamentally trained as a cognitive behavioral therapist. That's what my graduate school, the training was focused on. And I've since kind of expanded from there to, I would call myself, more eclectic, but there's more to the human psyche, in my opinion, than just thoughts, cognitive and behaviors. There's a whole deeper well of the psyche. So I definitely lean towards psychodynamic therapy and existential therapy now, but
Can you?
do Well, let me just answer your question. I know I kind of trailed off there. So behaviorally, yes, I talk about that. Like you need to kind of start the engine, right? The human being is a machine. The body and behaviors are part of that machine. Depression has a tendency to literally depress you, kind of press you down. And you need to sometimes, like, I use a lot of analogies, but like if you are in the dark woods and it's cold and it's raining, you need to take action. You need to kind of pick up, there are things available in the environment. You need to pick up those sticks, though. You need to take that first step and pick up 2 sticks and rub them together to light a fire. And then once you have that fire going, you're warmer, your kind of mood improves, your morale improves, and then you say, well, you know what, maybe I'll build a little hut here to keep me out of the rain, right? And then the hut grows to a house, and now you start to make tools inside this house to hunt, and then before you know it, you have a whole village and civilization is born. But it all starts with pick up those 2 sticks, right? And I think, yes, absolutely. Like if you're depressed, do things like go and exercise, right? Prove to yourself that I can push through this depressive boundary that wants me to like lie in bed and wallow in my misery. And maybe if you go out and you exercise, you meet somebody at the gym or you have a good conversation, which leads to socializing more, which leads to, just an exponential growth of, I think, benefit. But it all starts with something as simple as get up, exercise, go for a run. Not to mention that there is copious amounts of studies that show that endorphins are released when you exercise and you will feel a degree better, right? So it's like a drug-free drug, so to speak, right? The neurochemicals of your brain get activated when you kind of, the spice of life gets activated when you go out there and live, right? And part of living is use the body. So yes, I would say I definitely talk to people in a very similar fashion about the importance of being active, and not just exercise, but okay, you don't want to exercise. What are your interests, right? You like painting, go paint. You like forging knives, go find a shop where you can do that. You like doing X, Y, or Z. You like surfing, you like doing this. Go be active. Use the body, and life will reward you.
So just to remind you, awesome, because you said existential
psychotherapy. Yep.
Yeah. So can you, I don't know, the elevator pitch for what that is exactly?
Yeah. So existential psychotherapy is a relatively small niche within the larger psychotherapy world, but it basically posits that fundamentally all kind of human psychological pathology, right, and neurosis can be boiled down into 4 main pillars of existential, like angst. And the existentialists and a lot of actually the depth psychologists posit that fundamentally the basic, emotion that human beings struggle with is anxiety, it's fear, right? So existential theory states that the 4 pillars that we're all struggling with, that you could have whatever issue that's very, very unique to your life. You can come in and talk about that, but it's always going to boil down to one of those 4 pillars or a combination of them. And the pillars are that we all have anxiety about mortality, that we are, probably the only species that is aware that we are going to die. Okay, that not just that we are going to die, but that everything that we love is going to die, right? And we don't want to think about that. So it's unconscious. We don't want to think every day that everybody that you talk to, everybody that you love, right, is at some point not going to be here anymore. Right? Because that's pretty powerful, because we don't understand really what death is, and it's frightening for people. Okay, so we have death. We have isolation in a very deep sense, meaning that we are all alone. And what that means is that you are the only person who is living your life. Okay? You're the only person who is seeing things out of your eyes, hearing things with your ears. And that fundamentally, you can't change that, right? And we try to mitigate that. And it's part of the reason why we have evolved to be so social, right? Is to kind of come together, because at least if we're all alone, but we're huddling together in the darkness, it makes it feel a little bit better. But fundamentally, even if you're married, you have kids, you have people all around you, it's still just you. You were born by yourself, okay? and you're going to die by yourself, and your life is only yours to experience. There's no other way. You can't merge people together. So existentially, even if we don't realize that, we are terrified of that fuck, I'm all alone. That's why you see a lot of interpersonal problems, because people are responding to that, and sometimes, they're responding in a way where they're getting involved in relationships that are really toxic, because it's better than this really deep feeling of isolation that I have, right? So we have death, we have isolation, we have responsibility is another fear, okay? That it's up to us, right? Fundamentally, you make choices in your life, right? And whether you know this or not, it's the truth that you make choices in your life, and that is frightening to people. And that's why we see a lot of conformity in either subtle or very profound ways, right? It's sometimes easier to let somebody else decide, right? Because then you don't have to accept responsibility for your life. You don't have to accept that maybe your life is not doing well because of the choices that you are making, right? And it's a kind of a challenging thing. You have to be very strong to say, hey, this is my life, and I need to make choices here. I'm unhappy with my job, but I'm miserable. You can make a choice to change it. I'm unhappy with my marriage. You could make a choice to change that. People are frightened by that. And again, I'm giving you the wave tops with all this stuff because it gets really deep. You can talk about the intricacies of it, but
this is great though.
It's a choice.
Just the four pillars are great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's choice. So we've got death, we've got isolation, we've got free will, right? Choice, responsibility. And finally, the last one is meaning. Okay, we are a meaning-seeking creature. The meaning of life is beyond our comprehension. Okay? So then fundamentally it falls back on us to bring individual meaning into our lives, right? A lot of people have angst because they are not doing things that they find purposeful or meaningful, and they on some level know that they are wasting their limited time, so that's how these things start to connect. They're like, I know I'm mortal, I know I only got 50, 60, 70 years here, and I hate my job, but I'm not making the right choices to get out of my job to go do what I want. I don't even know what is meaningful to me. And people are maybe not asking these questions because they don't know to ask them, but fundamentally, if you bring meaning into your life, the quality of it can improve, right? So if you talk about those things with people, right, there are ways to, going back to the path of the hero, those are the dragons to face, right? So how do you face mortality? Is that, you live life as fully as you can, right? How do you make your life full? Is that you bring meaning into it. How do you bring meaning in? You have to understand, what are my values? What is meaningful to me? How do you face isolation? Is that you endure it, right? You know that you can't escape it, right? And maybe you make choices that, instead of being in this toxic relationship, I'm going to let this person go, and I'm going to kind of face things on my own. And I'll only be with somebody if they are, healthy, right? How do I start making choices for myself as opposed to avoiding them? Well, you know what? I do hate my job, right? It's not meaningful to me. I only got 50 years on this planet. I'm going to make the choice to quit my job and go back to school to become a veterinarian, or whatever, right? Because that's what's important to me. And all of a sudden, you notice, like, wow, I'm so glad I did all that stuff 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't feel as depressed anymore. I don't feel as anxious because I'm kind of, on my path. So that's fundamentally, in my own crude way of trying to explain it, because the people who are really the originators of these theories are brilliant. But that's existential psychotherapy. Yeah.
Well, I will say that being able to encapsulate the idea of existential psychology in the time that you did is also some brilliance. So I appreciate that. And I hope people listening really appreciate that. Those are some thoughts that I didn't know about. I had no idea what that was. And breaking it down to 4 pillars is pretty amazing. I mean, if you're a trainer and you can make program design simple, and you can teach people to prioritize the right exercises, you've just saved them a bunch of time. And you did the same thing. Now, you mentioned that you were a practitioner of that, and then you said something else before, and you'll have to forgive me because I forget what it was. But
it would be like psychodynamic therapy, right? Which is kind of, it's similar to existential, and it focuses more on fundamentally relationships, okay, because again, because we're isolated, we are involved in all kinds of relationships with our parents, our friends, our wives, our children. So it's like, it's so pervasive that human beings, right? We are interacting with each other all the time. Okay, so that is going to have an impact on our psychology. One of the worst things you can do to somebody, and actually some of the worst things that I have been through, like in some of the trainings I talked about, was like, relatively short periods of real isolation. And it's very unpleasant. If you put somebody in a prison cell for days, weeks, months, or years and isolate them, it's torture, right? So we are drawn to each other. This is also, again, by no means going to be able to encapsulate the depth of psychodynamic therapy, but it's about relationships, right? It's about how relationships have left an imprint. It's about especially early relationships, because children are incapable of really processing their experiences early on, right? And what they do is they kind of internalize a lot of the early experiences they have. And this is kind of like coming right out of like what most people think about when they think about Sigmund Freud and talking about your mother or your father. But the fact of the matter is that those early relationships, or the lack of those relationships, have a huge impact on the development of your psychology and then how you go out there and interact with other people. Because unconsciously, according to their theories, right, you are going to have expectations of other people based off of these really, really early programmed experiences that you've had with people. If you're fortunate and you've had good early relationships, then maybe you'll be a little bit healthier and you'll expect something good out of other people, and you'll be able to push away maybe a toxic relationship. If you've had really bad experiences on a deep level, maybe consciously you understand that, yeah, I know that my parents didn't treat me well, and I know that I should be looking for this relationship, right? But the analogy they give about the unconscious and the conscious mind is that of the iceberg, that the tip of the iceberg, right, that's up there, is the conscious mind. But the real depth of your psychology is below the surface, the iceberg that floats underneath. And that's what is driving the ship of you. And that fundamentally people kind of, enact patterns without even realizing it, right? And they respond to people without even realizing it. And their psychology has been developed by things that they are fundamentally unaware of. And that's the basics of psychodynamic or psychoanalytic therapy, is uncovering the truth of yourself, like looking underneath the water and spending a lot of time underneath the water, trying to understand who you are and how the experiences that you have gone through, how they are affecting you today.
Very powerful stuff.
Yeah.
You spend your days going through this stuff with other people and really digging deep with them. Do you feel that psychologists need psychologists? Because you are subject to, and maybe it's not even necessarily, I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying it's a lot of emotion and intellect and just processing. Do you feel yourself that you think it's great if you talk to somebody else about stuff, or do you feel just in general that psychologists should have psychologists just to unload, just to sort of let your own thoughts fly about all of the energy that you're receiving constantly?
Sure. So I think it's beyond my opinion, but I think it's pretty standard in the field, is that it's strongly suggested that all psychologists go through some of their own therapy, at least at some point in their lives, to develop awareness, right? So you want to, at some point, you have to try to have some kind of self-awareness about what are my hangups, right? What are my biases? Where are my weaknesses? Because fundamentally, it's impossible to be objective with other people. Right? It's impossible because we are always the subject, right? You always have an impression. It's true objectivity is impossible for us because it's always subjective. So you have to be careful that you're not carrying your own baggage into therapy. You have to be careful that, if you had like an abusive father and then you're treating a man who's abusing his kids, like, can you work with that person and not very subtly or unconsciously be biased against them, right? If you had a wife who cheated on her, if you had a wife who cheated on you, and then you're working with a woman or a man who's committing adultery, can you work with that person? If you are a child that was abused and you're working with people, you have to kind of be aware of your own biases. You have to be aware of your own needs, right? So one of the biggest problems in psychotherapy is that you do develop a very intimate relationship with people. And one of the biggest ethical problems that we see in psychology is oftentimes therapists and patients will interact on a personal level because the psychologist is maybe unaware that, I'm really lonely, and I'm now attracted to this patient of mine. And you start to maybe blur the lines, and you start to do things that are unethical and harmful to the patient, because you have to be able to protect them from yourself. So on one level, I think that, and that's not just me thinking this is the opinion of the field, is that you should have some kind of treatment at some point to understand yourself, to relate to the patients, to know what it's like to sit in the patient's chair, right? To be able to relate to somebody. Now, do you need ongoing therapy to help process the amount of information and emotional impact that you're getting? I think it depends on the person, right? So you need to be able to certainly know how to cope with stress. You need to be aware of, wow, that was a really powerful session I just had. That was kind of disturbing. Do I need therapy for it, or do I have already skills developed that I am aware that, that was stressful, I'm feeling a certain kind of way about it, let me go do something that I know will help me, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be therapy, but maybe it's like, I keep a journal, right? And it's a great way of processing, or maybe I'll write down some of my thoughts or feelings, or maybe it's exercise, or maybe it's listening to music. Maybe it doesn't need to be therapy, but maybe it's just talking to a friend, not necessarily about the patient, but just talking to people, right? Using your own tools of coping with stress is important. Ongoing psychotherapy, it should be used, I think, although that, you can make the argument that it's always useful to kind of be always in therapy. I would say it's something that it's very similar to going to a medical doctor. Like, you go to a medical doctor when you're sick, when there's a problem. If you have a cold, you don't always need to go to the doctor. You say, okay, I know if I have a cold, I need more rest, I need to eat right, I need to kind of take some, increased vitamins or whatever the case may be. So I think it's similar in that sense. If there's a serious problem, then you go to a doctor. That's my opinion.
You mentioned journaling, something that I've tried in the past on and off, but I'm not great at it. And clients have used it. They're not great at it. It seems to be sometimes more of a chore than a help. Maybe if you've been doing it for a long time, I'm curious, do you go back and do you read over things that you've written, and maybe your quick couple-minute pitch on why I should be doing it, why people should be doing it?
Well, nobody should be doing anything, first off, right? It's one method, right? So maybe journaling is good for one person, but another person likes to draw, or another person likes to create music. I know you're really into like the stand-up paddleboarding, like it's all about processing, right? So first off, you're not great at it. Your clients are not great at it. What does that even mean if you're not great at it? If you could expand upon that.
Yeah, you know what? You just checked me immediately. Maybe it's not that they're great at it, but if they say that they want to do it, they'll do it for a short period of time, and then they don't do it anymore. And maybe that's because of what you just said. Maybe it's just not right for them. So
it may just not be right for people. It's not meant to be something that you're good at. It's meant you'll keep doing it if you feel better after doing it. So for me, it's a method of me processing my thoughts, my feelings, recording my dreams, and for me, it's expression, right? So you have things inside of you that, right? Think about this too. Language, we kind of take it for granted. Language spoken, language written. Take it for granted how powerful that is. Again, we are pretty much the only species on the planet that has such a sophisticated form of language, right? Or communicating. What are we doing when we're communicating language, right? We are taking something abstract, okay? Our feelings, so to speak, right? Our emotions, even our thoughts are relatively abstract. Like, what is a thought, right? If you think about that, right? What is a thought? So language, right? Words, letters, symbols give it some kind of form, right? And once we have this form, and processing means, just like if you process something, you have something abstract, you have raw material, and you basically process it through the filter of yourself, through your mind, and you give it some form. And when you give it a form like that, there's less there's less angst, because now you can perhaps see it. Maybe now there is a degree of catharsis in taking something that's in your gut, right, and bothering you abstractly, and processing it through your mind and getting it out onto a page. For me, that's exactly what I feel like. I feel like I'm literally taking something raw internally and putting it externally out, and I can look at it, and I can face the dragon better when I can see him, right? So journaling works really well for me because I like to write. I'm not great at it, and I don't do it that often, but I like prose, and it gives me an opportunity to kind of be creative with my writing. And it works for me, but it's only one method of processing, right? Because other people, like I said, processing can happen any kind of way. It can happen using verbal language, which is a form of behavior, or it can happen with stand-up paddleboarding or exercising or drawing, listening to music. So I would tell people, if they're interested in journaling, to let go of an idea that it has to be something, that it has to be great. It doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to have any kind of form. It doesn't have to make sense. Sometimes I'll write journal entries that are pages long. Sometimes it'll just be a sentence. And it shouldn't be something that you're trying to make coherent. It's just giving form to your thoughts and your feelings. And it's a stream of consciousness, which is something, a term people are familiar with, but give that stream a path to flow, as opposed to all of it being blocked up inside. So it doesn't have to be great. Just write.
Okay.
Yeah.
You bring up a thought in my mind. Just when does because I understand the processing point. So you're saying you take something that's inside of you, maybe negative, and you're putting words to it, you're getting it out onto the page. You actually feel that maybe you've lifted a weight out of your body and off your chest and put it onto the page and removed it. And you said that I have the option. Maybe my processing is I enjoy stand-up paddleboarding. You use that as an example. So maybe that's my processing. Is there a point where the processing is running from, because, oh, you feel good in this moment doing X, Y, and Z? Are you processing, and or are you running from it, or are you facing it? Is there a, I'm not sure if I'm articulating that properly, but
I mean, it's like, I don't think processing is avoiding. I think for me, especially with writing, processing is the opposite of avoiding. It's facing something. Why am I so upset right now? There are distractions. So it's very individual. So you could go out there and do the stand-up paddleboarding and be on some level kind of taking out your stress with you. And maybe while you're out there, you find a way to kind of come to terms with it, and it's not bothering you anymore, right? Maybe other people are going out there and they're just using it as a distraction. And when they get back to the shore, they're still feeling their same kind of angsty way. For me, writing and processing is facing it. Like, what do I feel right now? I don't know. It doesn't feel good. Let me take a look at it, right? The dragon's attacking me, right? So you got to be able to face him, right? And be able to look him in the eye and say, okay, this is what's going on here. So I don't think processing, if it's processing, I don't think you're avoiding it. I think avoidance is a whole nother issue. I think avoidance could be, I'm just going to go play video games right now, and I'll feel better for a little while, but when I stop playing video games, I still feel like shit. That would be more avoidance. So you'd have to kind of see about the reaction. And I think that's probably why writing maybe is a little bit more direct, because you do the stand-up paddleboard and you come back to the shore, and every time you come back you're miserable. So then maybe you need to take more of a direct look at it. Maybe that's what journaling is. But I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure what the formula is for directly processing things.
No, it's great. I feel that clear about that, because for me, after surfing or paddling, there isn't even a dragon. So yeah, that's the process. I guess maybe the success is removing any of those feelings that you
Sure.
had about whatever, and then able to clearly move on to the next thing without dragging the baggage of the former things into the next thing. Mm-hmm. So I like that. What's your personal fitness routine looking like? How do you unload stress physically? Like you journal, but I know that you just recently did a run, and you said that's sort of new to you, but you've been running on a daily basis maybe. And what are some other things that you do? What's your fitness routine look like?
Yeah, so part of my self-image, right? So I've always been an athlete my whole life. I mean, as far as I can remember, I was doing something: soccer, baseball, football, skiing as a kid, always active. Found my passion in wrestling, which is an incredibly, obviously, physical sport. Um, um, what do I do for fitness? Is I'm maintaining my self-image first off, right? I am exercising, and I have been, like I said, for most of my life. So it's part of my lifestyle. It's not even something that I feel like I need to do. It's something that if I don't do it for a certain amount of time, like I start to not feel healthy or happy or like myself. With the populations I'm working with, like you have to be physically fit. I mean, if you sit down with a Marine or a Navy SEAL and you are fat and out of shape, right away they're not going to relate to you. They're going to look at you like you're a shitbag. It's kind of sometimes the term they use. So it's part of the culture. Is like if you're going to be amongst the warriors, like you better be in warrior shape. It's just part of my challenge. It's part of me warding off death, right? So every year for my birthday, like I go for a run no matter what else is going on, no matter what kind of celebration I'm having. Like I need to run on my birthday. Running for me is like active meditation. So it's kind of like I've tried yoga, I've tried sitting meditations. I do them from time to time. But for me, running is active meditation. For a while, I was doing it with headphones, but I don't even use headphones anymore because I find that distracting. And when I'm on a run, I am able to kind of just be in the moment, and my cares kind of, for the most part, drift away. My actual routine is pretty basic, though. It's just a lot of, I'm not bodybuilding. I'm just doing like full body workouts. I try to hit all the main areas I know I need to hit. I like to do a lot of body weight type exercises, so a lot of pull-ups and dips. I think that just gives me a lot of good strength. And I run, so I usually work out maybe like 3 to 4 times a week on average. Right, I give myself, as I'm getting older, I'm almost 39. I notice that the recovery periods are just as important, right, as the breakdown periods. And as far as I've been running my whole life, right? If I'm doing soccer or baseball or football, you're running. I've been running as part of fitness with wrestling. I remember I used to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I hit in high school in the middle of winter time in the darkness and go run for wrestling, cardiovascular endurance, and that paid off so many dividends. I can't tell you how many matches I won just because I wasn't tired and the other guy was. And it goes back to goals for my life going forward. Right? All my fitness goals are not behind me. Right? I'm still developing goals. Is that I would like to run a marathon someday. So my typical run length is like 3 to 5 miles, which I can do. That's like my typical run. I pushed myself to do a half marathon, in part because the West Coast is beautiful, and the half marathon was conducted at Joshua Tree National Park. So that was a great kind of motivation. But that was the longest I've ever run in my life, which I'm happy that I did it at the oldest I've ever been in my life. It wasn't even that difficult, which again goes back to what we said earlier. Like gave me a sense of confidence. Like, oh, maybe I'm not getting old because I just ran a half marathon and it wasn't even that hard. Maybe I'm not getting old. And it gives me, again, another peak to pursue, a physical peak. Well, I'm going to run a full marathon someday, right? And maybe the marathon will turn into, like, well, I did that. Maybe I'll do a triathlon now. Maybe I'll expand it to swimming and biking. There's a part of me that is really intrigued by the idea of an Ironman, which, is very intense. I think it's a 2-mile swim, followed by right away a 100-mile bike ride, followed by right away a full 26-mile running marathon, which I don't know if I could ever do that, but that sounds awesome to push yourself to that point, to do 1 or 2 of them. And I kind of like the idea of warding off death, like your physicality is still there. You still can hold a sword and a shield, well into your 40s, 50s, whatever. So I don't know if I answered your question. I know I trail off a lot, but yeah.
Yeah. So 3 to 4 weeks on the workout, body weight, just lifting weights, full body workouts, running. You can do an Ironman if you want to. I'm sure of it, and if you want to train for it. You mentioned meditation very briefly. You said running is your meditation. Mm-hmm. I told you about the Wim Hof stuff that I've been doing and that I recently became certified. Do you recommend meditation to your patients? And if so, how do you ask them to meditate?
Yes, recommend meditation to my patients and to myself and to everybody. There are all kinds of meditation, I guess, out there, but I think mindfulness meditation is the one that I most recommend. And it's probably very similar to most other meditations, but the theory is that it's almost impossible to shut off your thoughts, right? Like the brain and the mind is always working, thinking, right? Thinking about the future, the past. There's a lot of in cognitive behavioral therapy. The whole concept of emotional discord is based off of maladaptive thoughts, right? That we're maybe depressed because we're thinking about things in the past, and we're anxious because we're worried about things in the future. Mindfulness is an attempt to get us to slow down that stream of consciousness and just be present in the moment, right? Where in this moment, perhaps the things from the past are not happening, right? In this moment, the concerns of the future are not happening. And I think being more present in the moment is a skill that you can learn through actively meditating, actively trying to sit there and slow down your thoughts, to at least observe that they're happening, because fundamentally, the theory is that unless you're like a meditation master, like literally somebody who's been doing it for decades, like imagine like, the Shaolin monk who can go up there and sit in silence for a month, right? Unless you're something like that, like you're going to struggle with the powerful stream of thoughts. So if you can at the very least observe those thoughts through meditation, like, okay, I'm thinking all these things, but these things are not me. My thoughts are not me. That's what meditation can help you to do. It helps you to kind of at least give some space, give some breathing room in between you and your thoughts, right? But you have to try to do that, and meditation is the method of trying to do that.
I like that. My thoughts are not me.
Yeah.
How about nutrition? Do you stress proper nutrition to your clients? Do you feel that if they eat healthy, that actually changes them physiologically?
I don't talk in great detail about nutrition to my patients. It's just something that doesn't really come up. I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't want to recommend things to them that I'm not fully educated on. Beyond just healthy diet, don't drink too much, don't eat too much sweets, basic stuff. For myself, what I have found has really worked for me in the past. Maybe I really started doing it maybe in the past like 2 to 3 years, is basically a version of the intermittent fasting. For me, I find works excellently. And it's a version of it because essentially what I do is that I probably have about one real meal a day, but I supplement that by, I usually make a pretty powerful protein shake, like a 100-gram protein shake that I'll kind of like sip on throughout the day. So I'm getting kind of like an infusion of protein throughout my day. And it's not total intermittent fasting because I'll usually have a piece of fruit to go along with that, But I have found that like one meal a day is great for my body and my mind. I feel leaner. In my line of work, I usually find if I eat a heavy meal, like I'm like falling asleep, I get the head nods in a session because whatever way my body works, my blood sugar spikes, whatever the case may be, but I'm sitting there really calmly talking to somebody and it just like, I get the nods. I was getting nods, but I find now if I don't eat, it's just kind of keeps me a little bit sharper. One thing I have learned through military experiences is actually that we all eat way too much, and that you have no idea until you try it how long you can actually go without food, right, before you really get hungry. I would make the argument that actually most people don't really ever experience real hunger or experience a behavioral trick where, yeah, you eat 3 times a day, so you think that you're hungry in between breakfast and lunch. Meanwhile, you're not even a little bit hungry, that you can go literally weeks without eating food. Weeks. But most people have never gone that far to see it. I've never gone weeks, but I actually, through military experiences, I have gone several days without eating anything. And surprisingly, like after that initial, like I'm hungry feeling fades, like you're not even really hungry anymore. So if you can go several days easily without being hungry, you can go a day with only eating one meal. That's my experience. I would not recommend that to anybody else. If anybody is listening, don't do that based on me saying it. I'm not qualified to say that. Do your own research. But for me, intermittent fasting works. I feel stronger as a result. And I've actually, I've gained, I think, more lean muscle mass by just having a protein shake and exercising, and I feel less, fatty, I guess, as a result. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
So you said that you weren't really listening to music in your runs anymore, but if you were to listen, what would you be listening to?
I listen to music all the time. Music is one of my great kind of lighthouses, right? But really, I mean, all kinds of music. I have like a pretty eclectic playlist, I guess, on my iPhone, which I love. I love being able to download music, and I like paying for music because I feel like you need to support the artist, because that's one field where if you don't pay for it, then they don't get paid, which means they can't make it, which means we don't get music. So I try to pay for music whenever I can. I like everything. I mean, my favorite band is Tool. I mean, they have been profoundly influential in my life. It was through a Tool song that I learned about Carl Jung back when I was 16 years old, right? They're an amazing band. That would be my favorite band, but like music that has substance. That would be the best way I can put it, right? I don't listen to most of the pop songs. You wouldn't find many of the popular songs that are on the radio today on my playlist. I like music that is attempting to be art. Music is an art form, and I like musicians and songs that are, in that vein, as opposed to, Post Malone or whatever the hell people are listening to. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that Pink Floyd, stuff like that.
All right. So this has been awesome. We're coming up on a little bit over an hour, and I think that you're going to start charging me soon. So I'm going to have to cut this, but everybody that will be on my podcast will get a question at the end. And the question is going to be, what's your personal definition of success? Take your time. I know that sometimes getting thrown questions like, out of nowhere, but.
Well, I think it's probably not too far off from any other definition of success, is like identifying a goal that's meaningful to you. And I think there are levels to it. At least trying to achieve that goal is a degree of success, because it's not always achieving, first off, that I think is successful, because maybe you push yourself and you don't make it all the way to the peak, right? But you make it 3/4 of the way up, and like, wow, I never even thought I would make it this far. All right, so maybe what I will do is I'll try something else in the future, because I did achieve some degree of success even in the pursuit of a goal. But ultimate success for me, to identify a genuinely meaningful goal in your life, identify what you need to do to challenge yourself to get there, right? To grow, to make sacrifices, right? And to do all those things, and then to, getting back to what we talked about earlier, to make it to the top of that mountain. So identify the mountain you want to climb and to do it, which is a pretty standard, I guess, definition of success, but that would be mine too.
Awesome. Love it. Well, look, man, I really appreciate your time. And I think that you've said some things that will definitely add value for everybody. They certainly have added value for me. And I always am very appreciative of everybody's time. And I think you're a great guy, and you articulate yourself very well. And it seems that you really enjoy what you do. And I'm sure that everybody that comes across your path and needs your help is definitely going to be helped. So I appreciate it, man. And it's been awesome.
I appreciate your time too, Matt. This was fun. And yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Awesome.
All right, man.